The Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Crown Estate Bill Lords, second reading.
Now.
Minister to move second reading. Darren Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Happy New Year to you and to the House. And can I start by commending my honourable friend, the member for Gloucester, for his moving 10-minute rule bill just before we started this item on the order paper. Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the bill now be read a second time. The purpose of this bill is to bring legislation governing the Crown Estate into the 21st century. The Crown Estate is a commercial business, independent from government, that operates for profit and competes in the marketplace for investment. Yet it is restricted in its ability to do so by legislation which has not been amended since 1961. With less ability to compete and to invest, it is less able to deliver returns for the public purse than it might otherwise be able to do. Existing limitations on the Crown Estate's powers have meant it has had to generate capital for investment by selling its assets. This is neither desirable nor sustainable. And under current legislation, the Crown Estate is constrained in its ability to support sustainable projects and to preserve our heritage for generations to come. These are the reasons why this bill is necessary and why the Crown Estate has asked successive governments for these reforms. The bill has been expanded and improved during its passage in the other place, with requirements relating to sustainable development, GB energy, and the composition of the board. Fundamentally, the changes this bill proposes will give the Crown Estate new freedoms, including the power to borrow as their competitors can, enabling them to adopt a sustainable and competitive business model. The bill has two key objectives. First, it broadens the scope of activities the Crown Estate can invest in order to support the delivery of its core purpose across net zero, nature recovery, economic growth, and generating returns to the public purse. In its current form, it is predominantly a property estate and is significantly limited in its investment options. The proposals in this bill therefore seek to provide it with the ability to invest more widely in new growth opportunities, for example, investing in the further mapping of our seabed. This will enable it to undertake significant de-risking activity, such as pre-consent surveys and supporting grid connection, thus increasing the frequency of leasing for offshore wind and supporting the clean energy transition. I shall.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. I don't think you'll hear much disagreement, or I certainly hope he doesn't hear much disagreement to the points that he's making very eloquently right now. However, I would like to query him as to why he believes that these provisions and these powers are relevant for Crown Estate in England and Wales, but aren't also being provided to the Crown Estate in Scotland.
I thank the Right Honourable Member for his intervention. As he knows, Crown Estate Scotland is a separate organisation to Crown Estate at the purpose of the bill today, but of course we continue to have conversations and we're pleased to talk to him and others on that issue for the future. I'll make progress if that's okay. The second objective of this bill is to enable the Crown Estate to invest in capital-intensive projects more effectively. It does so by empowering the Crown Estate to reduce the size of the cash reserves it needs to hold, thereby expanding its ability to use its land and property assets far more efficiently. Sure.
This is a giveaway. Let's be clear, this is a huge departure for the Crown Estate. And this bill allows the Crown Estate to basically go to the city and to raise capital based on its assets, most of which he highlights as property. Now, the partner or the sponsor department, government department, for the Crown Estate is the Treasury, as he will know. But investments go up and down. And what if those investments goes down? Who will be the guarantor for those liabilities? Will it be the taxpayer or will it be the Crown Estate?
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman. I'm going to come to a number of those points through the provisions in the sections in my speech. And if I've not answered them as I get towards the end, I'll take another intervention from him. As a result of the changes in the bill, the Crown Estate will be able to accelerate investment in redeveloping and decarbonising its Regent Street and historic London portfolio, as well as investing in projects to support science and innovation. This bill will unlock potential investment of up to £1.5 billion into the science, technology and innovation economy over the next 15 years, building on the Crown Estate's recent investment in the City of Oxford. To reduce the size of its cash holdings and engage in more capital-intensive activity in the long term, the Crown Estate needs the ability to borrow, as its competitors currently can. Such borrowing will be from the government or from other sources, but only with Treasury consent. And borrowing from the government will be at commercial rates, meaning the interest it pays, funded from its own income, will outweigh the cost of government borrowing that it then lends to the Crown Estate. This will enable the Crown Estate to build on its long track record of delivering significant revenues to the public purse year after year. It's now delivered over £4 billion in the last decade. Very briefly, yes.
Well, he'll decide that, but I'm sure I will be. Thank you. But isn't there the potential for conflict of interest here? He mentions GB Energy. I mean, that is a new government, Labour government, national policy, of which the government is encouraging, because of the partnership through the Treasury with the Crown Estate to invest in. But what if people out there don't like that policy? What if that GB Energy is a failure? Is there not a clear conflict of interest, potentially, between the Crown Estate and the incumbent government?
The Right Honourable Gentleman, Madam Deputy Speaker, is doing a brilliant job of anticipating the sections of my speech. And once again, I'm afraid I will just point at him again when I come to that section in due course. In fact, it's the next one, so he's in luck. There will be a memorandum of understanding in place between the Treasury and the Crown Estate that will govern how the borrowing powers will be exercised. Above all, the Crown Estate will be borrowing for investment, maximising the profits returned to the public purse. Any such borrowing will require Treasury consent, and all will be within our fiscal rules. Given these new powers will enable the Crown Estate to first draw on its cash holdings, it is not envisaged that these borrowing powers will be used until the end of this decade. As with any public sector borrowing, the Treasury will ensure that this is consistent with managing public money principles to ensure value for money for the taxpayer. The fiscal impacts of any Crown Estate borrowing will be fully considered, starting with this year's spending review, to ensure it's consistent with our fiscal rules. The bill contains a set of necessary reforms ensuring the two key objectives can be met, and that the Crown Estate can continue to operate effectively both now and in the years ahead. The bill is composed of 5 key elements. First, the bill widens investment powers by removing existing restrictions on investing in the current 1961 Act and clarifies the Crown Estate's ability to invest in complementary activities such as research, digital technology and energy supply chains. Second, it grants the Crown Estate a power to borrow with Treasury consent. As well as generating returns for the public purse, this new ability to borrow will free it up to make better use of its existing assets, leveraging these to give it more room to invest. Third, it makes amendments relating to the governance of the Crown Estate to provide legislative simplification and to bring it in line with the best practice for modern corporate governance. By expanding the number of commissioners, the board will be able to better reflect the growing breadth of the Crown Estate business and ensure a greater range of expertise and diversity at board level. The bill also requires the appointment of commissioners to advise on Wales, England and Northern Ireland, which will ensure that the board continues to act in the best interest of the areas in which it operates. Fourth, it requires the commissioners to keep under review the impact of their activities on the achievement of sustainable development goals in the UK. It is important that progress towards national goals on the environment and climate, as well as wider considerations on society and the economy, continue to be at the core of the Crown Estate strategy. And fifth, it requires the same annual report to include a section on the activities of the commissioners under their recently announced partnership with Great British Energy. This will ensure the details of the partnership and the benefits it creates are publicly available, clear for all and subject to debate in this House when those reports are published. I will.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. As I understand what he is proposing, the Crown Estate in relation to the seabed will be a licensing authority for renewable energy projects and can now invest in them as well. They have a primary duty to maximise the return to the Crown Estate of any activity that they undertake. So if there is a conflict between the siting of offshore wind sites, for example, and the use of that sea for the fishing industry, is it the case that the Crown Estate, to comply with the law, will be compelled to side with the renewable energy development at the expense of the fishing industry? And is that fair?
That is a great question, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I have no idea. So I will commit to write to him with an answer to that question, and forgive me for not knowing. Only if it's a question I know the answer to.
I wonder if I might be able to help a little bit with the question, in that the Crown Estate has engaged in supporting evidence and change programmes that has brought together the fishing industry and the renewables sector around the table to enable earlier planning to prevent some of the conflicts which we have seen happen between the fishing industry and the renewables sector. And there are good examples, and I have got some remarks in my speech later on, where those plans and that evidence and change programme have actually started to be implemented, so that the industries are working together hand in hand to prevent the kind of conflict that the honourable member, I know, is rightly concerned about.
1 second. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for her help. I hope it gives the right honourable gentleman some reassurance and sounds eminently sensible. I will give way. Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just to say that Clause 3 does actually cover the Commissioners must keep under review the impact of their activities on the achievement of sustainable development in the UK. So it's written into the bill as well.
I'm continually grateful for the team effort, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to my friends for having paid such close attention to the bill. I will make progress. Oh, go on, yes.
Look, I'm aware of the duty to remain under review, but the primary duty remains to maximise the return for the Crown Estate, and that surely is something that is going to override a provision for under review. I'm quite happy for the Crown Estate to be a licenser and indeed an investor, although there is something of a conflict of interest there. But as this bill progresses, surely there needs to be more concern taken about the impact that it will have on other seagoing industries in a way that I fear the Minister's initial response to me suggests that maybe has not been given sufficient attention thus far.
He should take my lack of knowing the answer not as guidance for other people paying sufficient attention to the issue. He's asked a very technical question, which I will commit to getting him an answer to, and we will make sure that is made available to him and the House before the bill goes to committee stage. The bill also currently creates obligations on the Commissioners in relation to salmon farming. This is an amendment that was placed in the bill from the other place. The Government does not believe that these would be effective in this bill, nor indeed appropriate given it relates to a devolved policy area, and therefore I can tell the House that we intend to seek to remove this at Public Bill Committee stage. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are 7 specific clauses in this bill. The first inserts 2 new sections into the Crown Estate Act of 1961 to clarify and broaden the powers of the Commissioners. It also removes Section 3, subsection 4 of the 1961 Act, thereby removing limitations on the investment powers of the Commissioners. The 2 new sections grant a power to borrow, subject to Treasury consent, and to clarify that the Commissioners have the powers to do that which is connected, conducive or incidental to meeting their general functions, including enhancing and maintaining the estate and the returns obtained from it. It allows the Crown Estate to borrow from the National Loans Fund, the Treasury or otherwise subject to Treasury consent, and authorises the Treasury to provide financial assistance to the Commissioners or to provide loans from the National Loans Fund. The second clause makes 2 amendments to modernise governance by increasing the maximum number of board members from 8 to 12 and removing the requirement for the salaries and expenses of its Commissioners to be paid out of voted funds. The third clause requires the Commissioners to keep under review the impact of their activities on the achievement of sustainable development in the United Kingdom. The fourth clause requires the Commissioners' annual report to include a specific report relating to the Crown Estate's partnership with Great British Energy. The fifth clause requires the Crown Commissioners to make assessments relating to salmon farms on Crown Estate land and to refuse or revoke a licence for a salmon farm if the assessment determines that it may or is causing environmental damage or raises or has significant animal welfare concerns. Go on, yep.
Thank the Minister for giving way. He mentioned GB Energy, he's mentioned the desire to get on and allow the Crown Estate in England and Wales to borrow. He won't have forgotten the fact that GB Energy is located, or is likely to be located, in my Aberdeen South constituency, and many of the projects which, of course, are going to drive the net zero agenda across the UK will come to fruition in Scotland. So I'd just like him again to provide a little bit of clarity, if he could, as to why he believes these powers should apply to the Crown Estate in England and Wales, but his government is not legislating for these powers to be provided to the Crown Estate in Scotland. I'm at a loss to understand the reasoning.
I thank him for his other intervention. He will know that the ambitions for GB Energy are broader than they relate to the provisions in the bill today. In relation to the connection between the Crown Estate and GB Energy in relation to the bill before the House, this is merely about the partnership that has already been announced in facilitating the investment opportunities that are available in relation to England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and I refer the Right Honourable Gentleman to my previous answer in relation to Crown Estates Scotland. The fifth clause, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've talked about Scotland a little bit in the context of this bill, Wales and elsewhere. Does the Minister believe that this bill will stimulate greater economic growth in other areas of the country, in regions like the South West Peninsula, where we have a huge amount of wind energy potential, for example? So has the Minister done an assessment of what sorts of investment opportunities might come out of this bill? Thank you.
I thank my honourable friend, the Member for Exeter, for his excellent question. He will know from the work of ministerial colleagues in the Department for Energy that there's enormous potential for offshore wind in the Celtic Sea and off of the southwest coast that is currently largely untapped. But a lot of the work that needs to be done in order to make those seabeds available and to be able to bring the interconnections on shore and then connect it to the grid to be able to make it viable for private sector investment requires quite a lot of upfront work. Part of the provisions in this bill will enable the Crown Estate, working in partnership with GB Energy, to identify those opportunities, to be able to invest in things like supply chain, but also, as I've mentioned earlier in my remarks, in preparation of planning for the seabed to identify the cost profiles that might relate to the projects as they're being developed, in order to facilitate the deals that we wish to make with the private sector suppliers to unlock those opportunities. So yes, we do see this as a really important enabling mechanism to take advantage of the opportunities we have in the southwest and in other parts of the country. The sixth clause of the bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, requires that separate commissioners must be appointed responsible for giving advice about England, Wales and Northern Ireland, noting, as we have on a number of occasions now, that Crown Estate Scotland is a separate entity. It also grants Welsh ministers and the Executive Office in Northern Ireland the right to be consulted on each of the appointments relating to those parts of the UK. The seventh clause sets out procedural matters relating to the extent and commencement of the bill. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, these clauses give the Crown Estate the flexibility it needs to meet its core duty of enhancing and maintaining the value of the estate and the returns obtained from it. This bill broadens the scope of activities the Crown Estate can engage in, enabling it to further invest in the energy transition, and it empowers the Crown Estate to invest in capital-intensive projects more effectively. Critically, these measures will unlock more long-term investment, increasing the contribution of the Crown Estate to creating high-quality jobs and driving growth across the United Kingdom. This bill delivers a targeted and measured enhancement to the Crown Estate's powers and governance, modernising it for the 21st century, and I commend it to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Shadow Minister James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And work on reform of the Crown Estate was developed by the previous government. I'm pleased that we're debating the bill today, and I thank my noble friends in the other place for the scrutiny they've already provided of it. And we support the objective to increase the Crown Estate's ability to compete and to invest, so it maintains and enhances the value of the estate and the income derived from it. And assets managed by the Crown Estate are not the property of the government, nor are they part of the sovereign's private estate. Since George III, the assets are held in right of the Crown, which encompasses the interests of the sovereign and the government. And that's why it's important that there is appropriate scrutiny of the Crown Estate and its assets, which total £15.5 billion, a rural portfolio of 185,000 acres, managing roughly 7,400 miles of coastline, with one of the largest portfolios of property in the West End. And of course, it returns all of its profits to the Treasury. And last year, there was a record profit of £1.1 billion, which was up over £600 million, largely due to fees from the Round 4. And over the last decade, it's generated £4.1 billion for the nation's finances. But there is the potential to do more. And in the business case prepared under the last government, the Crown Estate estimated that changes that are in this bill would enable it to generate £100 million a year in additional revenues by 2030. So it's right, therefore, that we help to modernise the Crown Estate as it aims to create lasting prosperity for the nation. And whilst we support the aims of the bill, there are obviously areas where further scrutiny is needed included a limit on the level of borrowing, governance, the relationship with Great British Energy, and safeguards in relation to the disposal of assets. And I will come to each in turn. As we've heard, the kernel of the bill is Clause 1, which confers a broader power to borrow to the Crown Estate, subject to Treasury consent. And whilst I note the need for Treasury approval, it is a concern there's a lack of parliamentary oversight on borrowing levels. When pushed by Baroness Vere of Norberton and other noble lords, the government stated that a limit on borrowing is better placed outside of legislation and instead in the Memorandum of Understanding between the Crown Estate and the Treasury. And that MOU sets out the Crown Estate can borrow up to 25% of the worth of its total assets. But an MOU is very easily altered. Public borrowing levels should be transparent. If Parliament's being asked to remove restrictions on borrowing, then why shouldn't there be a cap in legislation with the ability to swiftly amend it through statutory instrument if necessary to protect against unconstrained borrowing and the concerns my honourable friend raised? I give way to my honourable friend.
For my honourable friend giving way, can I agree with him? The Crown Estate and Treasury framework agreement was, I think, ineffective, or at least could have been strengthened. Memorandum of Understanding in a similar vein, so I support him. Can I just ask him to comment? I have concerns about this bill. The general principle I agree with, but I think there are potentially fiscal hazard and reputational hazard for the Crown, not just the Crown Estate, potentially ahead if some of these investments go south. And of course, there's a link to the sovereign grant. At the moment, there is a link between the Crown Estate and the sovereign grant. I think it's around 12%. Not all the income to the sovereign grant is derived from the Crown Estate. But if the investments were to go wrong, who would be liable? And if we have a weak MOU with no statutory oversight, it's more likely to go wrong.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for making those points, and I think he's absolutely right to highlight the potential risk there is. There's no one-way bet in life. There's no guarantee that the Crown Estate will successfully invest in projects that go well, and that's a point I will come on to a bit later in my speech in terms of the energy side of things. So it's perfectly reasonable, as we proposed in the other place, to have in legislation that 25% cap, which could be amended. And I'm sure this is an issue we'll come on to consider further during the committee stage. And the bill also alters the governance of the Crown Estate and provides for the number of commissioners to be increased to 12. And given the extension of the powers and the decrease in parliamentary oversight, pre-appointment scrutiny is of great importance. And I thank my noble friend Baroness Vere of Norberton for seeking and securing assurances from the government that the chairman of the Crown Estate Commissioners could be added to the Cabinet Office pre-appointment scrutiny list. And just before Christmas, Rick Lewis was announced as the preferred candidate for that role, and I'm pleased this appointment will now be considered by the Treasury Select Committee. But perhaps the Minister who's winding up can confirm whether other commissioners will be subject to any pre-appointment scrutiny. And turning to salaries, which I don't believe the Chief Secretary referred to, under Clause 2, Parliament will no longer be responsible for approving them through the estimates. Instead, they will be paid out of the income of the Crown Estate. And currently, the framework document sets out that remuneration of the Chief Executive should be in line with or below that of an appropriate benchmark group approved by the Treasury, and that a clear majority of the Chief Executive's total reward should be conditional upon performance. And we support rewarding success, but with the loss of parliamentary oversight, I'd be grateful if the Minister can confirm whether there are proposed to be any changes to the remuneration framework, and specifically for the Chief Executive, and will he give an undertaking to report to the House on any such change in the future? And turning to Great British Energy, on the day the bill was introduced, the government announced a partnership between the Crown Estate and GB Energy, which it claimed will unleash billions of pounds of investment in clean power. Indeed, the press release went on to say it will lead to up to 20 to 30 gigawatts of new offshore wind developments, reaching seabed leasing stage by 2030. But there is a lack of transparency over how this partnership will work, what difference it will make, and the impact on the estate's primary duties. And given the supposed significance, I would have expected to see a partnership agreement by now, as without one, we do not know what has been agreed. Can the Minister confirm if there is a partnership agreement yet, and will he commit to publishing it before the committee stage? Has the Crown Estate agreed to invest a certain amount with GB Energy? What process is there to ensure the Crown Estate continues to deliver on its duty to maintain and enhance the value of the estate? And how will the Crown Estate decide between projects GB Energy backs and other projects which may have a higher rate of return? And the GB Energy founding statement, Madam Deputy Speaker, adds to the confusion, adding that the Crown Estate will establish a new division, Great British Energy, the Crown Estate. This raises several questions. Will there be new staff required, or will it simply be a restructuring of the assisting group? The statement also says it will sit under both GB Energy and the Crown Estate, with strategy and investment agreed by GB Energy. So will decisions be made jointly on investments, or will the Crown Estate retain its independence? Given the government voted down our amendments to the GB Energy bill to introduce more accountability, it simply fuels some suspicion that the partnership's been created for political rather than economic reasons. And the reporting requirements that were secured and added to the bill in Clause 4, which the Chief Secretary referred to, will at least help bring some transparency to this, but there's a need for a lot more. And under the previous government, the UK became the first economy to more than halve emissions whilst growing the economy and became a leader in offshore wind. However, we must acknowledge that renewables are not cheap in all scenarios, and there's clearly a risk that the government will push up the cost of wind by rushing ahead to meet their political target and increase prices for consumers as a result. A far cry from the £300 cut in energy bills that Labour promised during the general election. And as we scrutinise this bill, Parliament has an important role to play to ensure the government does not seek to use the Crown Estate to try and deliver the Energy Secretary's damaging policies and undermine returns to the taxpayer. As I set out earlier, the Crown Estate owns some vital assets, so it's very surprising that there are so few safeguards to prevent commissioners from selling off such important assets. In the business case for these changes, the Crown Estate was planning £1.4 billion of disposals to fund investments, representing nearly 10% of its portfolio. When I asked the Crown Estate representatives what that covered, they said they're unable to disclose plans for disposals because it is commercially sensitive information. Again, this raises concerns about transparency. And in response to questions in the other place, the government said they were working with legal experts to establish the extent to which the Crown Estate can currently sell the seabed, for example. And at report stage, Lord Livermore confirmed that if the government established further legislation required to restrict the ability of the Crown Estate to sell the seabed, they would bring forward an amendment. So we'd be grateful if the Minister, in winding up, can update the House on the progress of these discussions and the need for such an amendment. Because the disposal of assets should be properly scrutinised, and the government rejected attempts in the other place to bring more scrutiny here and said that a statutory limit on disposals would undermine the flexibility the Crown Estate needed to operate commercially. But given the assets are held for the benefit of the nation, we should ensure some form of transparency if they're to be disposed of, whether that's reporting to Parliament or indeed seeking HMT approval for disposals of specific assets or those over a set value. Finally, salmon, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clause 5 would require the Commissioners to assess the environmental impact and animal welfare standards of salmon farms on the Crown Estate. And if a salmon farm is causing damage or animal welfare issues, then a licence would have to be refused. And I commend my noble friend Lord Forsyth of Drumlin for his tireless work on this matter and highlighting that salmon farming can cause detrimental impacts in the event of escapes in terms of disease and breeding and other issues. And given wild Atlantic salmon are now on the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List, these are perfectly reasonable obligations which he talked about might influence how the Crown Estate Scotland is to operate. So the amendment was sponsored by Lord Forsyth, but also by members of the Green Party and the Labour Party itself. So it's disappointing to hear the Chief Secretary intention to reverse that clause, and we look forward to that debate in the committee stage. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Jayne for giving way. Salmon farming is enormously important in my community, as indeed in many others around the Highlands and Islands. They will not be affected by this, apparently, although we might hear confirmation from that at a later stage. But is it the Honourable Gentleman's position that this is the only way of regulating salmon farmers. Is he not aware that there is a massive amount of regulation that goes through salmon farming already? Does he really think that the Crown Estate Commissioners are the people to be doing this job?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. He will have read, as I have, the Hansard debates in the other place where this issue was covered at some great length. So I defer to the points that were made by Lord Forsyth there. There is obviously regulation in place, but this simply adds a little bit to the bill to raise awareness of this issue. So the governments have said that they supported the objective of the amendment when it was discussed in the other House, but didn't think it was necessary. They didn't think it was going to do any damage. So I suggest it remains part of the bill. But to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Crown Estate Bill will help deliver the modernisation that is needed, but the purpose must be supporting the estate's duty to maintain and enhance its value and maximise return to taxpayers, rather than becoming an extension of GB Energy's chequebook. And we will be pursuing the concerns I've raised about checks on borrowing, governance, the relationship with GB Energy, and the safeguards in response to the disposal of assets to ensure that that remains the case.
Matt Rodda.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in today's debate. I'd like to speak in favour of the bill and to make a few brief points, both general ones about wider policy and some in relation to my constituency in Reading Central. First of all, I'd like to cover the issue about the estates in central London, then move on to the Crown Estates property around the coastline, and finally discuss some of what I hope will be significant wider benefits to the just transition to a green economy. First of all, in terms of modernising existing buildings in central London, I think it's often forgotten that our built environment is one of the poorest in terms of energy efficiency across the developed world, including in Europe, and that we do need to have significant investment. And we obviously can see this in the building that we work in. Many buildings in central London obviously date from Victorian, Edwardian or 1960s periods when building standards were much lower than they are now. And indeed there's enormous potential precisely because those building standards were lower, and there are issues like solid walls or cavity walls which aren't insulated, or the scope for replacing existing single glazing or poor quality older double glazing with newer materials. That precisely shows the potential benefits in carrying out this work. However, it's important to remember this is in the nature of one-off capital investments in the short term, which will lead to enormous benefits in the medium to longer term. So therefore, this type of measure, which is outlined so ably previously by the Right Honourable Gentleman on the front bench, is exactly what's needed for many large landowners to allow them to have the access to capital they need to carry out works which will improve building efficiency and therefore lead to energy saving. So I do welcome that, and I think it's important to remember the context of the built environment in London and across the country. Moving on to the issues at the coastline, I would like to ask for some further details and aspects of this. It's worth noting, though, that the UK is a leader in offshore wind. We need to recognise the benefits that we have seen in the last few years, and in particular the move to the majority of British energy being generated by low-carbon sources, particularly offshore wind. However, there's a need for a new, significant additional step up, and that needs, obviously, the mapping of new areas of seabed, new interconnectors, new grid connectivity at the coast, because the whole of the grid at the moment is really designed around a post-war model of large coal-fired generation inland. So there is significant need for further investment in coastal locations. And as my honourable friend from Exeter mentioned earlier, some of this isn't particularly well mapped, and part of the work that we're seeing allowed today is the ability of the Crown Estates to map a lot of its property on the coast or on the seabed more accurately, therefore allowing investment as well as supporting and regulating investment as well. I would like to ask the Chief Secretary if he could outline some further details of aspects of this, and in particular the scope for this bill to allow for more and to support more investment in interconnectors to other neighbouring countries, and indeed more grid connectivity at the coast itself, which at the moment can be a bottleneck for renewable energy coming on shore. Thirdly, I really would like to point out or discuss some of the wider benefits of the bill as I would see them, and also to ask some further questions about this. One of the big challenges, as I understand, is at the moment with the move towards renewable energy is delays in grid connectivity. And I've seen this in my own area where I visited a large solar farm next to the M4 motorway just outside Reading in one of the neighbouring seats. Is now in the seat occupied by my honourable friend from Woodley and Earley. And this large solar array was delayed, its connectivity to the grid was delayed by a year because of a lack of capacity, both amongst energy companies and the wider challenges in terms of infrastructure. And I hope the Chief Secretary can perhaps provide some further details on how the bill will allow further acceleration of grid connectivity. I also hope that it will add to the wider green energy economy, and indeed the benefits accruing from this could also be felt by some smaller onshore schemes, I would hope. I would certainly ask the Chief Secretary if he could investigate the possibility for this supporting some smaller schemes. So, for example, in my own area, there's been an innovative scheme to put a low-head hydro generation scheme on the Thames at Caversham. This is generating power for several hundred homes. However, there were significant challenges in installing this. And again, issues like grid connectivity, access to capital, and other practical issues delayed the project. Up and down the Thames, there are many, many examples of sites which could be used, and other major rivers, for this type of very straightforward, rapidly deployable form of renewable energy. And I would appreciate it if the Minister could write to me if he's not able to comment directly today. And equally, on a related matter, I do also hope that the bill may in some way support the wider rollout of solar on roofs and on potentially in canopies over car parks, both of which have enormous potential as deployable forms of solar, which would have limited impact on land use around the country and may indeed have some real benefits in terms of the ease in which they can be accessed. So I look forward to further details on these points. I warmly welcome the bill, and I thank the Chief Secretary for his words earlier.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Pippa Heylings.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to begin by extending my gratitude to all those who have worked tirelessly on this bill over the past 7 months in the Lords, and note in particular the way in which full transparency was offered and delivered by Lord Livermore, Financial Secretary to the Treasury, in response to requests for clarification and evidence. And I hope we can replicate that type of cooperation in the passage of the bill in this House. So the objectives of this bill are to broaden both the investment and borrowing powers of the Crown Estate and strengthen its corporate governance in order to help accelerate, among other things, the delivery of new renewable energy, particularly offshore wind. And we are generally supportive of this bill. And we would welcome scrutiny further on the issues around the cap on borrowing, accountability in terms of the relationship with GB Energy. As my honourable friend from Orkney and Shetland mentioned, managing the conflicts between competing interests and values of our seabed and coastline, community benefit, devolution in Wales, and our climate and nature duty. And I will proceed to sort of elucidate those a little more. Because we know that in the UK, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are off track in meeting our climate targets. And that's following the previous years of the Conservatives dithering and rowing back of our pledges. We need to increase investment in renewable energy to strengthen our energy security, help families keep warm and lower their energy bills, particularly during this cost of living crisis. As a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, families and businesses have been left exposed to skyrocketing bills. And for far too long, we've been reliant on autocrats like Putin to meet our energy needs. Now, the Crown Estate oversees 200,000 acres of land, 12,000 kilometres of coastline, and a seabed larger than the area combined landmass of England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So as the owner and steward of the seabed, the Crown Estate leases plots to offshore wind developers and other infrastructure projects, playing a fundamental role in the sustainable development of this national asset and the potential for securing our position as world-leading in floating offshore wind development. For many years, however, the Crown Estate has been constrained in its ability to borrow through the Treasury, forcing it, as we understand, to resort to selling off assets in order to fund its investments for the future. The changes proposed in this bill hold the potential to unlock, in partnership with Great British Energy, investment in vital infrastructure across supply chains, ports and clean energy sectors. accelerating progress in renewable energy by unblocking the huge delays to the delivery of new clean energy that's desperately needed, especially following the slow progress made under the previous government. It's reassuring to hear that during its passage through the Lords, assurances were provided that there would be a cap on borrowing to 20% of the loan value ratio. We look forward to seeing this reflected in the updated framework agreement as we go into the committee stage. On the same day that this bill was introduced in the House of Lords, the government announced the partnership with Great British Energy to bring forward new offshore wind developments. Despite the key significance of this new relationship between the two, the original bill did not provide for clarification or accountability regarding how this relationship will work. Clause 4, introduced by my Liberal Democrat colleagues, ensures important transparency through annual reports on activities within that relationship. However, we also share Energy UK's concerns about how this relationship will work, particularly in regard to other private sector investment, and we support their calls for annual schedules for offshore wind leasing, identifying locations and target capacities. Such a roadmap will help developers and suppliers plan investments, including necessary port upgrades, and align with the offshore wind industrial growth plan. Critically, yes, I will.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for giving way and ask if she agrees with me that this legislation should have set out a framework for devolving the Crown Estate to Wales, as is the case in Scotland.
I'll thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and indeed, having read the transcript of the debate during the Lords, there was a passionate request for this to be considered, that indeed in Wales, just as in Scotland, the benefits of this bill, of the Crown Estate, be devolved to Welsh communities and to the Welsh administration. And we do support that and look forward to discussing that during the committee stage. Thank you. Another crucial area, as it has been mentioned, is the mapping of the seabed around our coastline. And the Crown Estate has already begun with award-winning geospatial techniques to do this. This makes a key contribution to spatial planning for our coastal and marine areas, which needs to balance economic development with environmental responsibility. For years, the Liberal Democrats have called for comprehensive land and sea use frameworks. Now, while the government has committed to a land use framework, we remain far behind on marine spatial planning. We've heard today, in response to my honourable friend from Orkney and Shetland's concerns about the conflict of interest for the Crown Estate to be the one leading on determining priorities in our coastal and marine areas, it is here that we would like to seek assurances that it's the statutory bodies, such as the Maritime Marine Organisation, which is responsible for prioritising and managing competing interests and values between users and values of our coastline, including fishing, as was mentioned, tourism, amenity use, shipping. All of these things need to be managed, and that can be done through our marine spatial management. We urge caution that this is not the Crown Estate that by default becomes the leader in this, because it is the owner and steward of the seabed and has capacity for mapping. We know that it is undertaking liaison work with fisheries, and that is good. However, the statutory body for managing these competing interests is the MMO, and we seek assurances at committee stage that that will be clarified. Now, raising the issue of devolution to Wales brings me to this key point, which is about community benefits. We need to know how communities will benefit from investment in infrastructure and renewable projects facilitated through this bill. Local communities must not feel that this energy transformation is being done to them, but instead it is empowering them to participate and benefit from this. While the new borrowing powers will enable investment in offshore wind, they will also facilitate property development across the 185,000 acres of the Crown Estate. So this bill must do more to ensure that these developments do not ride roughshod over community concerns regarding planning, infrastructure and environmental standards, both on land and at sea. People must have a say in the decisions that affect them, and where infrastructure is concerned, they should also receive the benefits where appropriate. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was really pleased to see the inclusion of Amendment 10 championed by the Baroness Heylings, which requires commissioners to review the impact of their activities on sustainable development. As Liberal Democrats, we've long called for climate and nature duties to be a requirement for all public bodies. As Baroness Heylings wisely said, what matters is the end game and the results. What matters is the impact we have and how much we have shifted the dial in terms of what the Crown Estate achieves in support of the government's climate and nature objectives. During the debate in the Lords, there was an undertaking that the framework agreement would be updated to include a definition of the meaning of sustainable development as regards the Crown Estate, with explicit reference to Part 1 of the Climate Change Act 2008, the targets for 2050, Section 56 of the Climate Change Act, and Sections 1 to 3 of the Environment Act 2021 regarding nature recovery. I look forward to seeing an updated version of the framework agreement to reassure us that this definition of sustainable development has been included. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill presents a trident of opportunity. It can enhance energy security, reduce household bills and bring us closer to achieving our net zero targets. But we cannot afford to lose sight of the need for financial accountability, the duty to protect nature, the need to devolve to Wales and the need to ensure that all communities are included in this crucial journey to net zero. Thank you.
Henry Tufnell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish you and colleagues in the House a very happy new year. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in this debate. The Crown Estate sits as one of the more peculiar features in our society. King George III's surrender in 1760 to Parliament has now morphed into a corporate body that submits 88% of its profits to the Treasury, with 12% remaining with His Majesty. It does not stop there. The borrowing powers granted under this legislation will be up to 60 billion, and when GB Energy's investment stands at 8 billion, it demonstrates the scale that this organisation wields and the power, the reach and its influence. The key question is then, does this organisation serve the people of this great country? Or is it like any other commercial outfit seeking to feather its own nest in the name of corporate greed? In our United Kingdom, one of our biggest and most powerful natural resources is wind. To cut bills, deliver energy security and achieve net zero, we have to become to wind what Saudi Arabia is to crude oil. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, off the coast of my wonderful coastal, diverse and rural constituency of Pembrokeshire, we have abundance of wind, but thankfully not much hot air. And yet 12 miles offshore, that glorious wind blows with such regularity, such majesty, such force that would make Aeolus proud. The seabed is owned by none other than the Crown Estate. In the last few years, creativity in international industrial policy has moved on, in danger of leaving the UK trailing behind. The United States and the European Union are actively incentivising investment in domestic supply chains, justified against their need for national energy security and urgent acceleration to net zero. To keep pace internationally, we must grab the nettle and do it fast. The Crown Estate must utilise its own financial resources to make enabling investments that crowd in private investment into UK supply chains, such as ports and other coastal facilities for floating wind. I have been doing everything I can over the last year to engage constructively with the Crown Estate, but unfortunately I've yet to secure any assurances that they will utilise their financial resources for the benefit of our energy security, our jobs of the future and our acceleration to net zero. And so we cannot sit by and let this conflict between raising national income via annual option fees and incentivising early investment to develop regional supply chains ruin the chances of bringing children out of poverty and giving young people in areas like mine back home in Pembrokeshire good, secure, long-term, well-paid jobs. The bill before us should give full rein to the Crown Estate to explore all such options to maximise domestic supply chains, particularly in regards to floating offshore wind. The population of South Wales and the South West will never forgive us if we don't seize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to redevelop their regional economies. And the Crown Estate has an absolutely pivotal role to play here, one that speaks to all that the King has done across much of his career to address climate change and align business interests with the rejuvenation of economically deprived regions. Yes, the Crown Estate have set out their strategy in respect of integration, ports and apprenticeships and skills. But there has to be optimal vis-à-vis the clean energy strategy and the focus of this new Labour government. When carrying out their leasing rounds, they should set out the options considered to include assessment of and reasons for rejection of recent international precedents, including but not limited to ScotWind, lease auction of 25 gigawatts of mixed floating, fixed and floating offshore wind, which included commitments to project expenditure in Scotland via supply chain development statements, and did so without triggering a legal challenge by the European Union. Or the US Bureau of Ocean Energy Management lease auctions for offshore wind, which included a 20% bid credit for investments in domestic US supply chains. For example, the recent lease sale auction for offshore wind in California. And also consideration of non-price factors in lease auctions, especially weightings allocated to sustainability of supply chains, which would give a lifeline to communities in Port Talbot, and resilience of supply chains, aka also known as in terms of energy security, which is likely to favour ports geographic to offshore project sites like my own in Milford Haven in Pembrokeshire. And there has been examples and precedents for this, as set out in the recent EU Net Industry Act. We need this bill to equip the Crown Estate with the powers to introduce non-price factors more directly into the seabed rights auction process. For example, by offering a fee discount, as they do in the United States, for supply chain investments that reduce the risk of offshore wind projects being delayed due to international supply bottlenecks, which in turn would accelerate our progress to a net zero power sector and protect UK energy security. Finally, geographic ring fencing is a critical element of ensuring that we as a government tackle regional inequality head-on and with real urgency. We must end the historic injustice of the politics of extraction, where the resources of a community like mine are used to build ever more lavish buildings while young children struggle to get 3 square meals a day. This bill can make a real difference, and I urge the Minister to be bold and to be ambitious, and I reassure him of my full support as he does just that.
Llinos, Medi.
The Crown Estate owns 65% of Wales foreshores and riverbeds and more than 50,000 acres of land. Recent rising demand for renewable energy projects has resulted in the value of the land skyrocketing. In 2007, the assets value of the Crown Estate in Wales was £21.1 million. In 2023, this reached £853 million. Correspondingly, profits generated from these assets have also increased. Net revenue profits from across the Crown Estate rose from £345 million in 2020 to £1.1 billion in 2024. Profits generated from Wales's natural resources, however, are not retained for the Welsh public purse. Instead, they leave Wales and are sent to the Treasury and the sovereign grant. This is in contrast with Scotland, where the Crown Estate is devolved and profits from Scottish natural resources is transferred to the Scottish Government. In 2024, this was estimated to be a record £108.3 million. How can the government justify Welsh profits being sent to the Treasury and the monarch, whereas in Scotland they are held back and put back into the Scottish purse? The situation is worse than that, with Welsh councils having to pay a lease fee simply to use the land which is owned by the Crown Estate. And in 2023, this was nearly £300,000, which, with huge pressures on councils' budget, how can that be justified? In the age of coal, Wales saw a huge extraction of wealth from our communities. In 2025, Wales is now experiencing a similar process of the extraction of our green wealth. Yes, of course.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The reality is Plaid Cymru members opposite are divided on this issue. They're confused as well. Their colleagues in the other place supported the provisions in this bill to create a new commissioner with special responsibility for Wales, yet now you are saying only devolution will do. So can the Honourable Member opposite explain why she thinks those Plaid Cymru colleagues in the House of Lords, in the other place, are wrong?
Thank you, and as predicted, I will be going on to answer that question and maybe show a pragmatic way of working forward. So I'll just carry on. In 2025, Wales is now experiencing a similar process of extraction of our green wealth, and we cannot let this happen. It is for the people of Wales, like in Scotland, to have the control and to derive the benefits from all profits generated from our own resources. The bill, however, makes no mention of devolving the estate to Wales. This is despite the fact that the new investment and borrowing powers under the bill may allow the Crown Estate to generate £100 million more a year in profits for the Treasury. None of this will be retained by the Welsh Government. In the other place, Lord Haynes' amendment, supported by Plaid Cymru, has ensured that there will be a Welsh representation on the Crown Estate Board. Whilst we welcome that as a step forward, it still does not address the fact that the membership of the Crown Estate Board is largely outside of the democratic control, as it's the monarch who appoints the commissioners, who makes investment and borrowing decisions, not Parliament or the Senedd. Plaid Cymru has been leading the cause for devolution of the Crown Estate and has done so for many years. Yes, of course.
Thank you. Devolving the Crown Estate would needlessly jeopardise the role that it is playing right now to deliver good, clean energy and jobs which are needed right across Wales, including in the constituency of my honourable member, the member opposite, and my neighbour, which these jobs are really well needed all across North Wales, as the member opposite well knows. Would the member opposite really want... She's a great champion for her constituency, but would she really want a delay in delivering these jobs and these clean energy projects, which are so well needed all across Wales?
Thank you. I'm also going on to that because I'm fully aware, being an energy champion for my constituents for many, many years, that we don't need any delay, but there is a way of working that through slowly as well, and benefiting from Scotland's experience as well. Plaid Cymru has been leading the cause for devolution of the Crown Estate and has done so for many years. And in July 2023, the Senedd passed a Plaid Cymru motion calling for the devolution of the management of the Crown Estate to Welsh Government. Only through devolution of the Crown Estate can the people of Wales have a democratically control over their natural resources. Plaid Cymru will be bringing forward an amendment to devolve the Crown Estate to Wales. We will be looking to engage constructively with the Government, including how to support the Welsh Government, the Crown Estate and energy developers to prepare for devolution. However, the Government cannot simply ignore the direction of travel. There is an overwhelming consensus in Wales for devolution. It is supported by the Welsh Labour Government, the Independent Commission on the Constitutional Future of Wales, as well as 58% of the people of Wales. It is time for the Government to listen and devolve the Crown Estate to Wales.
Jayne Kirkham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I represent Truro and Falmouth, which has huge potential to benefit from floating offshore wind. With Falmouth docks in our position in the Celtic Sea, if the build-out of the sea is done quickly and done well, then our young people could benefit from good, well-paid jobs in a strong local supply chain. However, it will need intervention to get to that place. There are currently no successful leasing rounds or contracts for difference in the Celtic Sea, except one test and demo model that's struggling to build viably due to price changes. It can't be just left to the market to build local supply chains either. That will not occur without intervention and investment in our ports, businesses and further education. I welcome this bill. The changes to the powers of the Crown Estate will make it possible for them, in partnership with GB Energy, to invest in ports like Falmouth, mapping of the seabed to front-load the leasing rounds, research and development and local supply chains. When a college in my constituency, Falmouth Marine School, was struggling to get funding for a Level 2 course on floating offshore wind engineering for local 14 to 16-year-olds, the Crown Estate actually stepped in with 1 year's funding to allow it to go ahead on a pilot scale. With these changes, more positive interventions like this could be made. But with powers to borrow from the Treasury National Loans Fund and invest come greater responsibility. The framework for this borrowing is to be drawn up at a later date, but the Crown Estate is classified as a public corporation with a nearly 16 billion portfolio. Therefore, it's very important it's held accountable to scrutiny in the normal way. I welcome the change in governance, the number of commissioners, and the fact that they will now be paid out of Crown Estate proceeds rather than from Parliament. But the fact remains that if they are to be given more power and control and enter into partnership with GB Energy, then their aims and objectives need to strongly align with the growth agenda, industrial strategy and our environmental targets, and there needs to be a mechanism of accountability. Where Clause 3 compels the Commissioners to keep under review the impact of their activities on the achievement of sustainable development in the UK, maybe the word strongly align with would seem to be more appropriate. Most of the proceeds of the Crown Estate, which will be very lucrative now wind energy is a priority, as of course they own much of the seabed and there'll be many more leasing rounds, the proceeds go to Treasury, but the way the leasing rounds are conducted is also very important. If the Crown Estate's priorities are truly to achieve sustainable development in the UK, then price cannot be the sole criteria for awarding each lease. The highest bidder may not be the one who would work with the local population, consider the environmental impact, invest in FE, or headquarter their development office in an area of somewhere like Cornwall that needs it, or grow the supply chain. The way leases are awarded needs to be considered in the round, and we do have the power to do that. There are exemptions to WTO rules that allow contracts or leases for energy security to factor in socio-economic and environmental factors in their decision-making criteria, and we should make use of them. Currently, the Crown Estate asks for annual option fees from developers. If Clause 3 is truly to be the priority, then surely those option fees could be deployed into building local supply chains and mitigating those environmental and other impacts. The partnership between the Crown Estate and GB Energy has the potential to be a huge force for good, spearheading the development of offshore renewable energy in a speedy but sustainable way and laying the groundwork for our energy security of the future, building local communities, infrastructure and supply chains in some of the most left behind and deprived areas of the UK. With a unified strategy between all levels of the public sector, including this public corporation, and faithful allegiance to the aim of Clause 3, the achievement of sustainable development in the UK, this could be the key that unlocks the future potential of the Celtic Sea and hopefully kickstarts Cornwall's clean energy revolution.
Angus MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to obviously speak about the Crown Estate's borrowing powers and in the broadening of its investment scope. These changes are intended to enhance the Crown Estate's capacity to support our ambitious goals for renewable energy, our nature recovery and economic growth. And the bill is undoubtedly a significant step forward in enabling the Crown Estate to play a greater role in the transition to net zero. I fully support its efforts and ambitions. Now, the partnership between the Crown Estate and Great British Energy to develop offshore wind projects is exciting. Many of us have been trying to get Great British Energy to include community benefits and community ownership within its reach, but have failed to do so. It does. Does it? Okay. We've tried very hard. There is a clause going to the other house on the 13th of November or 13th of January to try and get them to do that. So maybe you know something I don't yet. But anyway, that's good news. Thank you. Today I want to focus on a critical element that's close to my heart, and perhaps even more familiar to my colleagues, because I bang on about it, and the subject, of course, is community benefits. Remote and rural Britain pay far more for its energy than those who can access mains gas. And we have a much higher level of poverty in remote and rural Britain, especially fuel poverty. Communities hosting renewable energy projects, particularly those overlooking offshore wind farms, deserve to see tangible benefits from these developments. This bill presents an opportunity to ensure that offshore wind farm projects, and indeed all renewable energy projects, not only meet our national and global ambitions, but also provide meaningful, real-world advantages to the people most impacted by them. Now, there are numerous examples from overseas where community benefits have become very significant, and one such is Germany, where in the North Sea archipelago of Helgoland, 3 offshore wind farms now generate, well, in 2016, generated 22 million euros. So this is massive amounts of money. Now, while the bill focuses on increasing borrowing powers and investment flexibility, there is currently no mention of how communities will benefit from these developments, unless the lady opposite knows something, which I don't yet know. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for giving way. Is he aware of the example of Orsted in my constituency? It's just given £1 million to the Horizon Youth Zone to support all young people across the Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes constituency and further afield with mentoring support, new activities, free mentoring and support outside of school hours. Not only that, they sponsor local fun runs. RWE, another company that's operating in my constituency, is supporting education activities. Both of those companies not only are employing masses of people, but are engaging with schools to support young people to have the skills and the talents to come and then work in those companies. That is the reality of community benefit.
Funnily enough, it's a subject as a Highland Councillor I've spent many years working on. The Highland Council, I know this is not Crown Estate, England and Wales, the Highland Council had 9.1 million of community benefits. Scotland as a whole, 23 million. This is a hundreds of £billion industry across the whole of Britain, and we should have, say, 5% of that as community benefits, which would be transformational for Cornwall, Devon, Pembrokeshire, and indeed Scotland. Just to continue, I encourage the House to consider how the bill could establish a robust framework for community benefits that can serve as a model for renewable energy projects across the whole of the UK, working closely with the Scottish Crown Estate. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Crown Estate Bill represents a vital step forward in enabling the UK to meet its net zero targets and enhance energy security. However, it is equally vital that we legislate and we include in Crown Estates, England and Wales, and indeed in Scotland, statutory powers to ensure that these transformative projects see their fair share of community benefits for the communities. Thank you.
Perran.
Muraz, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the provisions made in this bill, improving the governance of the Crown Estate and broadening its investment powers and capacity to borrow. As stated in the bill, these changes will mean that commissioners can undertake activities such as investing in port infrastructure and digital technologies to map the seabed. And as a Cornish MP, it's the seabed that I'm going to be focusing on for the next few minutes. Commissioners will be enabled to assist with investment in public infrastructure for the benefit of the nation. And I support these provisions on the basis that the Crown Estate uses its increased power to invest in areas of higher deprivation where there is a clear commercial potential, such as has been mentioned, floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea. And in this respect, Cornwall is perhaps the best example of where post-industrial deprivation is high, and yet, and I'm sorry to mention this to Welsh members in the chamber, Cornwall is the closest landmass to much of the Celtic Sea floating offshore wind opportunity. It's also, as has been mentioned, home to the third deepest natural harbour in the world in Falmouth. And the development of the port of Falmouth would also support the export potential of critical minerals such as tin from my constituency of Camborne, Redruth and Hale, and lithium that will be mined in Cornwall. And as was mentioned by the member for Reading Central, Cornwall's economic development is also held back by a lack of grid connectivity. And I hope that support for this bill will result in significant improvements in this area as well. The Crown Estate plays a fundamental role as an enabler of infrastructure projects. The bill inserts a new subsection into the 1961 Crown Estate Act, which requires the commissioners to keep under review the impact of their activities on the achievement of sustainable development in the United Kingdom. I would sincerely hope that ministers agree with me that deprived communities like mine in Camborne, Redruth and Hale should be the direct beneficiaries of this development through the work of the Crown Estate. And I also hope that in passing this bill, the Crown Estate fully understands the expectations of deprived coastal communities in every corner of England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Cornwall.
Jim Allister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can well understand the need to update the Crown Estate Act, particularly in regard to the financial reach of the Crown Estate and the assistance that it may require in that regard. Though it is perfectly clear, even listening to this debate, that members have rightly discerned that the real driving force behind this legislation is in fact to twin with Great British Energy the promotion of offshore wind energy. And that seems to be the primary motivation which lies behind much of this bill. And when you create circumstances where the Crown Estate is required and facilitated to increase its own financial success, and then you twin it with the promotion of GB energy, you inevitably incentivise the development of offshore wind, which in its own circumstances has its part to play, but is not, I believe, the answer to all our needs. I've already in Northern Ireland seen examples of proposals for offshore energy, particularly in the South Down area, which provoked great and rightful opposition from the fishing industry, leading to substantial difficulties on that front. And yet it's quite clear from this bill that when it talks about sustainable development, it's not talking about sustainable development going into the future in respect of the historic use of our seas as fishing grounds. It's talking about sustainable development for our seas as sites for offshore wind energy. And as an honourable member raised, there is a tension between offshore wind developments and wind farms and fishing. But it seems to me that this bill has made up its mind as to which is the priority. And we've heard in this debate that the definition that's going to come of sustainable development specific to this Act is one which is very much orientated on the climate change theology, and therefore is going to be that which places the focus for the need for wind farms above the needs of the fishing industry. And that, I think, is not well serving some of the interests of our coastal communities. And I think there is a need to reinstate some balance into this in that regard. When I look at Clause 3 and see this focus on sustainable development, which has the obvious meaning that I've referenced, and then look at Clause 5. Now, I know the government has said they will be removing Clause 5, but in Clause 5 there's an interesting contrast. In Clause 5, when it comes to salmon farming, one of the matters to be looked at is environmental impact. But when it comes to wind farms, no such requirement to look at environmental impact, only to look at sustainable development, which is couched in the terms that are to favour offshore wind development. I think of my own constituency of North Antrim, and there are already proposals that not far offshore, just beyond the territory that contains the wonderful Giant's Causeway, Rathwell Island, that there could be, cheek by jowl, coastwise, with areas of outstanding natural beauty, huge offshore wind farms. I don't think that's enhancing the coastline or the waters in and about North Antrim. There's been similar proposals off Port Stewart in County Londonderry. But when I read this bill, it seems to me that the primacy is being given, the nudge, in fact it's much more than a nudge, the incentivising that has been given is towards pushing along offshore wind farms with little regard, and certainly no corresponding regard, to the environmental impacts that that could have on whole communities. So, certainly.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I'm just struck by the fact that I know that so many of the people that live in his constituency will be dealing with extremely high energy bills in poorly insulated houses, and desperate indeed to be able to see those energy bills go down, see decent jobs come back to Northern Ireland, and for them and their communities to thrive. I also recognise the value and importance of heritage sites. For example, in my constituency in Thanet, surrounded on 3 sides by sea, with enormous amounts of opportunity for offshore wind, as well as wanting to retain the value and beauty of our surrounding environment. Can he not see that these things are reconcilable, and that this is not a theology, it is a science and an economic requirement of this country in order to be able to serve his residents and constituencies as well as mine?
And the point I'm making, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the tension between the environmental impacts and the sustainable development, which is the code word for offshore wind. The tension between those in this bill is out of kilter, because it is very much weighted in favour of the offshore wind, with little or no regard, it would seem, to the environmental impacts. And I'm simply saying to this House, we need to have regard to both. And I don't think we serve future generations well if we surrender the beauty and the serenity of our coastline that we enjoy to that which will be blotted for years to come with huge offshore wind farms. Yes, they have their place, but not in every place. That, I think, is the key component. You know, take the Giant's Causeway, UNESCO site, and are we to say that shortly beyond it there should be giant wind farms? What does that do for the UNESCO setting of the Giant's Causeway or other sites around the United Kingdom? So I'm advocating caution. I'm advocating that we remember it's not just about offshore wind farms, it's also about preserving, protecting and getting it right in respect of our environment. And I'm not sure that the balance in this bill does that.
Dave Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to be here to be able to take part in this debate alongside so many of my coastal colleagues. But it does put me in slightly odd company because actually Lichfield and Burntwood and the villages is quite a long way from the edge. We are quite a long way from the coast. But I do think it's important that actually we see some representation from the middle of England. In this one.
It's Staffordshire too.
Because actually, when you look into the desired outputs of this bill and what this bill will mean for constituents across England, across Wales, across Scotland, coastal communities and non-coastal communities, this is about growth. It's about jobs. Now, very few of those jobs in floating offshore wind are likely to be along the River Trent, but it's about actually building a country which works for everybody across the country for the future. Now, in my constituency, I'm quite fortunate that there is actually a Crown Estate holding, and that's an agricultural holding. And I think it's a wonderful strength of the Crown Estate that it does support so much agriculture across the country, and that most traditional of industries and that most important of industries that provides us with the food that we eat. And I think it's a real strength of our country that so much of the land in the Crown Estate is leased out to farmers who can go off and do their thing and run their business. But actually, what this bill seeks to do is update the Crown Estate, which actually hasn't had any legislation past it since 1961, 24 years before there was a Dave Robertson. And by updating that, we make the Crown Estate ready for the 21st century, which, as of about a week ago, we are now in the second quarter of, which is a fact I'm still struggling to quite compute myself. But when we make these changes and when we allow the Crown Estate to be able to invest in those industries of the future, to bring those jobs of the future, to bring that investment into the UK, it will not only grow our economy, which will be felt across the entirety of the country, it will not only tackle some of the real pockets of deprivation that we have, particularly around the coast of the country, which will be beneficial and will in itself unlock economic growth, will drive wealth creation right across the UK. But it will also drive investment everywhere. The simple fact is we have now another large investor operating in the UK will mean other investors will be able to seek other opportunities. And if there's any of them listening, please do have a chat with me. There are absolutely some sites that I would like to talk to you about, particularly Burntwood Town Centre. But alongside that, there is another really important issue here, and there hasn't been enough focus, I don't think, necessarily on the real value of this, on helping us reach our goals in relation to net zero. Because actually, in a week when large parts of my constituency and a large number of farmers in my constituency have again found their fields replaced by some type of aquatic environment because of flooding, and yet again Kings Bromley has been almost cut off, climate change is real, climate change is here, it's having an economic impact, it's having a social impact, and it's having a real world impact. And we need to take steps to do that. By allowing the Crown Estate to partner with Great British Energy in the way that this bill proposes, by allowing it to drive down the carbon cost of our energy, by allowing it to help us move to that just transition, it will not only cut energy bills everywhere in the country, Lichfield, Burntwood, villages, everywhere. It will drive up investment. It will bring economic growth everywhere across the UK. And it will help us meet our goals, our obligations to the climate crisis, which again will have a material impact on the lives of our children, our children's children, and all generations to come. On that basis, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is an absolute pleasure to be able to say that I am fully supportive of this bill, and I look forward to helping it through its further stages through Parliament. Thank you very much.
Melanie on.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I wish you a very happy new year. I wanted to just start by saying I do welcome the powers that the government is proposing to bring in to enable the Crown Estate to drive greater investment into the country's future, to boost energy security, nature recovery and economic growth. And I think it should be allowed to access private sector funding to expand that and get the greatest benefit from its access to financing as is possible, and not retreat to either markets having to survive on their own and not delivering, or recourse to the public sector for critical funding to grow industries. I do want to focus my comments specifically around Clause 3 on sustainable development and pick up on some of the comments that have been made at the Lords Committee stage as well. Within my constituency of Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes, we are at the forefront of the delivery of practical skills in the day-to-day operations and continued maintenance of the offshore wind sector. And my constituents benefit from apprenticeships, introductory training, continuous professional development, and critically long-term, well-paid employment within this sector. And this bill has the potential to open possibilities for broader community engagement through the promotion of various educational opportunities in numerous work streams. Having worked with the Crown Estate, and I have to say I have had a slightly different experience to my colleague from Pembrokeshire, in a previous role prior to returning to this place, I know that in recent years it has sought to expand the areas of work that it actively engages in, that it has provided immense support for the renewable sector, remembering that it's not just this government, it has been a collective understanding that we must have, for energy security purposes, as a minimum, to look at renewable energy sources to supplement our other energy sources in this country as we move forward and as we look at the global economics and changing impact of the energy industry and how different countries are maximising this change to encourage wealth into their countries. So we know that it's not just this government, it is governments around the world, it is previous governments in this place that recognise that this is the way forward and one that we should be embracing and accepting, not as being something that is divisive, not as something that is prohibitive to other sectors, but is something that is going to be the mainstay of this country, and simply objecting to it and saying no isn't going to assist in moving this forward, and we should be working together, as I think the renewable sector has been endeavouring to do and has been enabled and facilitated to do in a much stronger way through the partnership that the Crown Estate has facilitated, to bring together so many different relevant parties to seek to find appropriate solutions to some of the most testing and challenging questions that the industry finds itself facing. And those do include things like people and skills. It does include things like environmental impact and derogations. It does include the unlocking of the UK supply chain. It does include spatial squeeze. It does include offshore asset security, which we haven't talked about today, and also aviation impact, something else that has not been discussed today. So it has had a critical role in making sure that the voices in each of those areas where this new industry is having an impact, and it is having an impact, and I think that the industry itself recognises that it's having an impact, but it has to be done in collaboration and cooperation with those other existing organisations, industries and operators in those sectors. And through those evidence and change programmes, it became clear to everybody who was involved, including those who might be less than happy that there is a new industry that is making things different, challenging in certain circumstances, that the earlier those issues were considered as part of the Crown Estate's planning and scoping, the easier it was to fulfil the very existing and basic expectations of both the Crown Estate and the renewable sector from a government perspective. The earlier the consultation and partnership working on those common difficulties and challenges meant that agreeable solutions were found earlier, and acceptable frameworks were then able to be built for future use. Some of that is in evidence now with the Celtic Sea developments and with the fishing communities in those areas. And I would just also say I was very interested because I hear the comments. He's not in his place now. The Right Honourable Member for Orkney is my co-chair on the Fisheries APPG, and so rightly raises the issues that the fishing communities and concerns that fishing communities will have. But in the Lord stage, committee stage, there was a conversation about the regional wealth funds that this bill will create. And it seems to me that that means that there is a prize opportunity, therefore, for support for the fishing industry, for training in the fishing industry, to make it work alongside the renewables sector, to look at decarbonisation opportunities that will come from decarbonisation that is happening in the renewables sector too, when it comes to looking at offshore vessels. And flexibility of service. So it's not just that a fishing vessel is a fishing vessel. Could it be combined and used for multiple purposes? Can it be used for surveys? Yes, it can, because fishing vessels are already being used for surveys. So there is an opportunity there for this bill to support those other industries, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. And with these new ways of working, there seems to me to be a great opportunity to expand the level of knowledge and understanding of the sector, to be able to teach the next generation of young people about how things really work in practice. To date, that has been a bit more experimental, I think it's fair to say, but now, because the sector is maturing, all of the organisations involved have become more experienced, there is much more collective learning, there are clearer lines of guidance, and that the Crown Estate has a definitive interest in ensuring a wide and common understanding. And I just think that I would like to focus this on the people and skills area of work that the Crown Estate has had some engagement in, because there is an acceptance that the workforce will grow and needs to grow substantially. I think for areas like mine and other coastal communities, that making sure that we have got a skilled workforce ready to go is absolutely imperative, because it is much more effective to make sure that people are able to have the skills to get the jobs, to earn their own way and have some pride in their life of working in an industry that they are proud to be working in, than it is to simply rely on other elements of community benefits which may well be short-lived and don't have that long-term impact that growing a brand new industry around the country delivers. We know that the industry is going to need more than 3 times its current numbers, and I put over the next decade, but I don't think that that's true. I think that actually this is over the next half of a decade. That's hardly anything at all, simply to meet the needs of the industry, and that is across all of those different areas that I mentioned: environmental impact, aviation, etc. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank you for allowing me to intervene. Can I just come back to this bit about community benefits, which you brought up when I spoke? The community benefits will be hundreds of millions for 25 years or the life of it. It will be absolutely transformational to the most rural parts of Britain. And I think it's not just something that will come and go. Thank you.
Leon.
I thank the honourable member for that comment. I think it is about how we view community benefits and how embedded in communities they are. And actually, the Liberal Democrat spokeswoman was talking about things not being done to communities and being done with communities. So what will best benefit a community? And having that discussion at an early stage, which is exactly what I've been advocating. I think the traditional understanding of community benefit is, payment for, local football teams' shirts or, things like that. But that isn't what I see this industry or this bill as unlocking. I do think that it needs to be about transforming local communities. And I think, from my perspective, that critically it comes through skills. It comes through skills, it comes through the supply chain and delivering industrial benefits that local people can have access to, which is principally the thrust of what I am trying to get at in my comments. Clearly, I'm not having a very successful time with that, if the honourable gentleman didn't see it. But I will persevere. I'm sure he'll be delighted to know. The Crown Estate, and interestingly, the Crown Estate has recently supported a community project in my constituency called Project Renewables, with a K, Madam Deputy Speaker, for a slightly Nordic slant on things, and that's a kind of box park construction next to the National Fishing Heritage Centre, bringing together the old and the new, the past and the present and the future. And it's providing community education. It's a space to bring schools, it's a space for businesses to come and visitors all to come together and learn about the renewable sector in Grimsby, its history, the importance of it and the possibilities for the future. That community education piece actually is incredibly important and something that we don't talk about enough, in my view. The Crown Estate did recognise that there is a need for wider understanding of activities like that, sometimes significant and sometimes significantly disruptive in local areas, so that residents can better understand what is happening in their place. And there is an opportunity. I keep talking about opportunity because so far I felt that there have been comments that have not seen this as an opportunity, an expansion, an investment, growth and long-term change for areas. And I think that this bill actually unlocks quite a lot of that. For greater expansion, not only in terms of public information and education, but to have things like a single standard of available materials for off-the-shelf information, supporting local areas to explain, which would just to help a general understanding that would stop individual companies producing their own bespoke education programmes, rather having something that is uniform, that provides the facts, and then companies can build upon that if they want. It would be a much stronger offer, more beneficial to collective understanding because of that uniformity. But I think that there are also further steps that the Crown Estate could take in terms of skills for local people to guarantee that aim of sustainable development. In my area, the Freeport is already undertaking some working on skills, and under the new devolution plans there's provision for skills to be a key strand of mayoral responsibility. But how can the Crown Estate fit into that model? Because I believe that it really must, to maximise the benefit of all of those organisations and having a common theme and common objectives. Arguably, the Crown Estate has a lot more to lose if the skills are not there for offshore deployment and long-term maintenance support. We've got new projects like the Able Quay, which is just outside of my constituency, but that will make offshore wind ambitions deliverable, opening up those supply chain investment opportunities that we have been waiting for, frankly, for far too long, and enable the Crown Estate to generate significant revenue and value for the UK. The Crown Estate could currently, but under new proposals in the bill has even greater opportunity to do, invest in infrastructure like this quay. We know that port facilities are holding back the sector at the moment, and also in those core skills that are in shortage in the industry currently, or that we know will become a critical blockage in the future once the newly consented projects get underway. If we really want to maximise the value of these projects and see the UK get the biggest bang for its buck, then using every arm of every organisation to actively support in overcoming these challenges is essential. And I know that the Crown Estate is willing, I've seen it in action, so I know that it's also able, but I wonder if this bill needs to be explicit in saying that these are areas which it has a duty to focus on. Infrastructure and skills are so critical. Without these prerequisites in place, it could make projects undeliverable, and no one developer or supply chain company can do oversupply or investment ahead of decisions, because the Crown Estate makes so many of the final decisions alongside government, and no one can invest until those decisions are made. And just briefly, further on devolution, the creation of GB Energy, these two great leaps in structural change in the country give a great opportunity for new public institutions to be created to intervene in skills. And I would like to see in the Humber region an arrangement or an organisation that brings together the Crown Estate, the new devolved authorities, Freeport, the Humber Energy Board, which, with support from the likes of GB Energy and wider central government, can back a coherent approach to supporting skills and avoiding this becoming a barrier to project delivery, as well as reducing costs by supplying supplying enough talent for the whole sector rather than each project chasing the same small pool of people. We should use this bill to catalyse substantial and lasting change, providing employment opportunities for generations to come. I understand that Crown Estate Scotland are already carrying out similar efforts, actively promoting skills and job opportunities through initiatives like community capacity grants, which support social enterprising and training courses and land-based skills education. So I don't think it is beyond the scope of this bill. Thank you.
Luke Charters.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and a Happy New Year to you. I'm pleased to be speaking in today's debate on the Crown Estate Bill. Though it's short, this is an incredibly important piece of legislation, not least because it ties together two things we care about on these benches: unlocking growth and driving clean energy. Looking at the benches opposite, perhaps it is something they don't care about. But also, this bill gives us the chance to start delivering the growth this country desperately needs. It'll do so without requiring new fiscal statements or drastic economic reforms. But most importantly, though, it will benefit my constituents in York Outer and the country as a whole. For too long, the Crown Estate's ability to act as an engine for growth has been held back by outdated rules. Imagine a business sitting on vast potential, real estate, seabed rights and assets worth billions, but unable to reinvest or leverage those resources to their full extent. This bill changes that by freeing up the Crown Estate's balance sheet and allowing it to operate more like a modern, agile business. It creates the conditions for growth without requiring sweeping fiscal reforms or even additional taxpayer contributions. But this isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet, it's about impact. Through the Crown Estate's role in renewable energy, this legislation will support the creation of new projects, secure our domestic energy production and unlock up to £60 billion in private sector investment. That's the kind of forward-thinking approach we need to create to secure a prosperous future. I will.
I'm a friend for giving way. Would he agree with me that this is another example of how this Labour government is rolling out its sleeves, getting the job done, creating growth, but also creating jobs as well for communities like York Outer and mine in Harlow?
Well, I always agree with my honourable friend, and he will recognise the impact that this bill brings not only for the Crown Estate but to GB Energy as well. One of the first things this new government implemented pretty quickly. So taken together with GB Energy, this represents two pieces of thoughtful complementary legislation that will support our green energy transition and economic growth. What a stark contrast to the previous government, who not only ran out of ideas but also failed to make the few that they had actually work together in the first place. The interaction between the Crown Estate Bill and the GB Energy Bill is vital. In York Outer, we've got a number of exciting projects that are ready to go that exemplify how these changes can drive forward our ambitions for a clean, secure energy future. Proposed battery storage facilities in York Outer could become critical national infrastructure for our local energy network. Or take Hesse Solar Farm, which was recently awarded funding under the Contracts for Difference scheme a few months ago. I welcome the exploration of wind projects like the Elvington Harewood Wind Green Energy Park and the North Wigington onshore wind project. I should mention that just today we've discovered that wind power was Britain's largest source of energy in 2024, topping gas-fired power plants for the first time in history. With the Crown Estate Bill, we can make even more projects like these in York Outer possible, unlocking clean energy for my region and beyond. And this takes me to the issue of energy security. The party opposite, wherever they are, continues to oppose our publicly owned clean power energy company. Perhaps they've forgotten why it's so crucial to transfer power back to the hands of the British people. Their myopic and naive approach of the last government left our energy portfolio far too exposed. And this bill supports Britain's flexibility and freedom to secure our own energy supply. It enables British households to be supported by British power, produced, owned and delivered by the British people. And this is what Great British Energy is all about. We've all seen the cost of relying on foreign oil and gas. Families and businesses paid the price of our energy supply being dictated by foreign powers. With this government, that needs to stop and will stop. So this bill is a huge win for our energy independence. But the benefits of this bill do go beyond energy. The Crown Estate is already a significant contributor to the public purse, and last year it generated over £1 billion in net revenue profit, much of which was returned to the Treasury. By giving the Crown Estate the freedom to reinvest and modernise, we can grow that figure even further. That's not just a win for government revenues, it's a win for taxpayers in York Outer, as that money can be reinvested in public services and infrastructure across the UK. And I know some members opposite, wherever they are, may worry about fiscal rules, but let me reassure them. This bill is radical in what it achieves, but it does so in a sensible manner. By allowing the Crown Estate to initially use its cash reserves for investment, there's no immediate need to actually trigger new borrowing powers. This is therefore a measured approach that creates confidence for investors while keeping fiscal discipline intact. It's not about ripping up the rule book, it's about using it more effectively. I will.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend from York Outer for giving way. He's giving an excellent speech that I'm sure the front bench will be enjoying listening to. Madam Deputy Speaker, I wonder if my honourable friend will agree with me. He's mentioned sensibility and moderation, both words I'd use to describe my constituents in Newcastle-under-Lyme, and would he join me in urging the Crown Estate, as they enjoy their new freedoms and powers to which he has just referred, to give a thought to the people and the place in the economy of Newcastle-Lyme as they look to invest in the future?
Luke Charters.
Well, I was half expecting my honourable friend to make a reference to Wally's Quarry, but I couldn't quite conceive how he'd link that to the Crown Estate Bill. But he will, like me, agree with the fact that the additional revenue that the Crown Estate Bill will raise will benefit his constituents as much as mine. Our final point, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the past decade, the Crown Estate has returned £4.1 billion in net revenue profit to the Treasury. Just imagine how much more it could achieve with the freedom this bill provides, not just for the country, but for constituencies like mine in York Outer. This is what smart, forward-thinking legislation looks like, supporting businesses, securing energy and driving growth. So I urge members across the House, in particular to the party opposite, wherever they are, to back this bill and help us deliver a brighter green and more prosperous future. Thank you.
Shadow Minister James Wild.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And with the leave of the House, it's a pleasure to respond briefly on behalf of His Majesty's loyal opposition. And I don't know if there's a party going on that I haven't been invited to, but I'm personally very happy to be here to take part in the debate. And it's been a good debate with over 10 members contributing, not only from coastal areas like my own northwest Norfolk constituency, but the voice from Lichfield we heard as well, which underlines the importance of the Crown Estate to all of our constituencies. And the members from Truro and Falmouth and Camborne and Redruth spoke about the potential benefits for investment in their constituencies and their part of the world, including funding college courses, which is very important, that energy production and investment can have. I think the honourable member for Mid and South Pembrokeshire may want to speak to his honourable friend and take some tips, the honourable member for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes, about how to get on with the Crown Estate and get them to do what you actually want to do and secure the benefits for his constituency, and perhaps he can have a reset with the Crown Estate going forward. And a number of members spoke about the importance of community benefits, which is very important to securing public support for new infrastructure, be that energy or other issues. We did hear quite a bit from honourable members opposite about cutting energy bills. And I distinctly remember during the election campaign the pledge that they all made to cut energy bills by £300. But energy bills are going up. There's no date for when those bills are going to come down. So voters, constituents will remember the pledges that were made. And at the moment, all they can see is their costs going up. And the concern is that the pace at which the Energy Secretary wants to drive forward is actually going to drive up the costs for all of our constituents. And I began my remarks by emphasising the Crown Estate is neither the property of the government nor part of the sovereign's private estate. And that is key. its core purpose is to maintain and enhance the value of the estate and the income derived from it, which is why greater transparency is needed about the partnership with GB Energy. The Minister will have heard, and I'm sure noted down, all my questions in my opening speech, so I won't repeat them all. But I repeat, will he commit to publishing that partnership agreement before we head into the committee stage? And some of the contributions we've heard, I'm afraid, only fuelled my suspicions of the government's intention here to use the Crown estate as a vehicle for its energy policy, as a provisional part of the GB Energy body, whatever that will turn out to be. And that raises issues about how investments will be determined and the returns that are generated for the taxpayer. And there's risks surrounding investments and whether crowding in that honourable members have referred to does actually happen, and if investment in ports will actually drive a return, and why commercial providers aren't seeking to make similar investments themselves. And that conflict and risk was one of the points my honourable friend for the Wrekin, who's not in his place, sadly was concerned about. And I hope that that's a point that the Treasury Select Committee will engage with when they have the nominated new chairman of the Crown Estate Commissioners in front of them. And that's also why it's important that Parliament has oversight of the borrowing limits, rather than it just being in an MOU that can be changed at the Treasury whim. I do think that is an important protection that we have in place, and I know that the Minister will also respond to that point in his remarks. I would be very grateful if he did get back to the specific point I raised about disposals and the seabed and the commitment that Lord Livermore made in the report stage in the other place about protections and whether an amendment is needed and whether one will be forthcoming. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is wide support for the bill from across the House, but the short-term interests of this government should not come at the long-term expense of the Crown Estate and the nation. And I look forward to continuing the scrutiny of this bill in committee.
Minister, James Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to close this debate on the Crown Estate Bill, and may I wish you a happy new year. I'm grateful to the Opposition Shadow Minister for his comments today, as well as all of my honourable friends for their contributions. I'm particularly grateful for the support for the bill in general from the opposition, which they are displaying by their absence this afternoon. But I very much welcome the questions which the opposition minister set out, and I will go through some of those in my remarks. Now, as my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, noted in his opening speech, the purpose of this bill is to bring the legislation governing the Crown Estate into the 21st century by making a targeted and measured enhancement to its powers and governance. Without this bill, the Crown Estate would continue to be restricted in its ability to compete and to invest, and therefore it would be limited in its ability to deliver returns to the public purse. This bill, therefore, broadens the scope of its activities. The Crown Estate can engage in, as a result of this bill, enabling it to further invest in the energy transition that we know is so crucial. It empowers the Crown Estate to invest in capital-intensive projects more effectively and critically. These measures will unlock more long-term investment, increasing the contribution the Crown Estate can make to creating high-quality jobs and driving growth across the UK. Now, turning to some of the points raised in today's debate. Firstly, as I said, I appreciate the Shadow Minister's broad support for the aims of the bill, and to turn to his question specifically around the Crown Estate's borrowing powers. Now, this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, is clear that any borrowing undertaken by the Crown Estate can only be from the Treasury or otherwise with Treasury consent, and the Treasury will, of course, ensure that any borrowing is consistent with our fiscal rules. There will, as has been noted, be a memorandum of understanding in place between the Treasury and the Crown Estate, and that will govern how borrowing powers will be exercised. And as with any public sector borrowing, the Treasury will ensure that this is consistent with managing public money principles to ensure value for money for the taxpayer. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Shadow Minister also asked specific questions about Commissioners' pre-appointment scrutiny. And I'd like to set out for him how the appointment of other Commissioners is likely to work, because the Crown Estate Commissioners who manage the Crown Estate are appointed by His Majesty on the recommendation of Ministers. And this appointment process is, of course, governed by the Code for Public Appointments. The reforms in this bill will not alter the fundamental statutory basis of the Crown Estate as a commercial business independent from government that operates for profit and competes in the marketplace, and they need to recruit the highest quality talent to its board of commissioners. Within that context, it would therefore not be appropriate for either the government nor Parliament to place further requirements on this recruitment process. The Shadow Minister also asked about Chief Executive pay, and I can set out to him that the details for Chief Executive remuneration are, of course, a matter for the Crown Estate's board, which is operationally independent of government, as I have set out. Now, because the Crown Estate is statutorily an independent commercial organisation, which returns hundreds of millions of pounds in profit to the Exchequer every year, continuing this success is crucial, and it requires the organisation to have the freedom to compete for the top talent in the commercial world. Now, we know that Chief Executive remuneration in this context is, however, set at the lower end of the private sector peer group, which is agreed with the Treasury, and the majority of the package is in fact conditional upon performance, which ensures that the Chief Executive's rewards are heavily dependent on delivering long-term value to the Exchequer. The Shadow Minister also asked about governance when it comes to Crown Estate and Great British Energy. And I can set out to him the operational matters in regard to the partnership, but they will be determined in their final detail by the passing of the Great British Energy Bill, which of course is currently going through the House of Commons and the House of Parliament. And once it completes all of its legislative changes, the partnership will then be subject to an agreement between the Crown Estate and Great British Energy. Now, although the partnership agreement itself will not be published, given it will be commercially sensitive, the Crown Estate have committed to publish information relating to the partnership as part of its existing annual report. And this will include a report on the activities of the commissioners under that partnership and any effects or benefits resulting from the activities of the commissions that entails. The opposition, the Shadow Minister, asked a specific question about the amendment on the seabed, which was debated in the other place by Lord Livermore. Now, as honourable members may know, at the Lord's report stage of the Crown Estate Bill, the Financial Secretary of the Treasury committed to bring forward an amendment, if it was needed, to restrict the ability of the Crown Estate to sell the seabed. This was in response to concerns from peers that the seabed, which is owned by the Crown Estate, is a unique asset and therefore special protections may be warranted. As the Financial Secretary noted at the time, the law on the ownership of the seabed is complex, and so officials are working with the Crown Estate to establish the extent to which the Crown Estate can currently sell the seabed. If it is established, Madam Deputy Speaker, that further legislation is required to restrict the ability of the Crown Estate to sell the seabed, we will look to bring forward an amendment at committee stage. And finally, the Opposition Minister mentioned around the measures which were inserted to the bill in the other place in relation to salmon. And I think there is a fundamental question here, Madam Deputy Speaker, about whether this bill really is an appropriate vehicle to be having this debate around the rights of salmon and protecting animal rights in that context. Because within England, Wales and Northern Ireland, to which this bill applies, there is on Crown Estate owned land only one relevant area, one relevant salmon farm. This really is an issue which relates more widely to Scotland, which of course is governed by Crown Estate Scotland and not by the matters within this bill. Now, we know that fisheries policy is the responsibility of devolved governments. In Scotland, all fish farming in England is regulated with the intention to ensure it's carried out in a responsible manner. And given that virtually all salmon aquaculture in the UK takes place in Scotland, it really is a matter for a different debate. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, as well as the comments from the Shadow Minister, we also heard from the Lib Dem spokesperson, the Honourable Member for South Cambridgeshire. I think many of the points I noted she raised, I think, have been covered in what I said so far, although she raised an additional point which aligned with a point raised by the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland around how the Crown Estate will balance the expansion of offshore renewables with the needs of the fishing industry and also with marine wildlife and so on. So I'd like to set out briefly the government's position on that matter, because we know that the Crown Estate is committed to sustainable management of the seabed, and where appropriate, it collaborates with industry stakeholders, marine licence bodies and environmental NGOs to ensure that activities on the seabed are conducted responsibly. Now, as with any developer, the Crown Estate's proposals go through a standard planning application process, which include the relevant environmental assessments. Under the Crown Estate strategy, it has an objective to take a leading role in stewarding the natural environment and biodiversity, and key to delivering this aim is managing the seabed in a way that reduces pressure on and accelerates the recovery of our marine environment. This bill will not directly impact how much commercial fishing takes place in areas managed by the Crown Estate. Moving on, Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend, the member for Reading Central, raised an important point around grid connections and grid connectivity, which is obviously vital to making sure that our plans to move towards clean energy are effective. And his points were important as part of the connection, I think, between the Crown Estate and Great British Energy, which we've been talking about during this debate today, because we know that one of the benefits of having the Crown Estate working with Great British Energy will be that they can work together to speed up the process of developing clean energy projects, including, of course, not just coordinating planning requirements, but also grid connections, as well as leasing land to de-risk and speed up projects so that private developers can get on and build them. And this will be crucial to unlocking the private investment and speeding up the deployment of clean energy infrastructure. Of course, we also know that as well as de-risking private sector investments, GB Energy and the Crown Estate will directly co-invest in clean energy infrastructure themselves, and this will include floating offshore wind and carbon capture projects. Madam Deputy Speaker, several of my honourable friends made really important points around local community benefits and supply chains, and I'd like to thank in particular my honourable friend, the members for Mid and South Pembrokeshire, Truro and Falmouth, and as well as opposition members from Inverness, Skye and West Ross-shire and Camborne and Redruth. They all focused on the importance of getting community benefits, local supply chains, investment in jobs and skills, and in fact my honourable friend, the member for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes, made a particularly good set of points, or helpful set of points, I felt, around the importance of long-term community benefit, not just people who are building infrastructure, making a one-off payment and then being gone from the situation, but actually making a long-term investment in the area and the people who live there. And she referred to a project in her constituency, Project with a K, Renewables, which was interesting to hear about. I would like to, it would be interesting to discuss that with her after this debate. But looking at more broadly what the Crown Estate has been doing and intends to do in terms of investing in local community benefit, we know the Crown Estate is committed to working with local communities and partners to enable employment and skills opportunities. For example, Madam Deputy Speaker, they've allocated £50 million through the Supply Chain Accelerator to stimulate green jobs, and they're developing a green skills pipeline from a GCSE in engineering skills offshore wind, seed funded by the Crown Estate and developed with Cornwall College, to a post-16 destination renewables course with Pembrokeshire College. The Crown Estate is also partnering with the employment charity Workwhile to create green construction apprenticeships. In relation to offshore wind specifically, the Crown Estate has worked on upskilling frontline DWP work coaches to be well equipped to support job seekers in the offshore wind industry through the Offshore Wind Learning Programme, and specifically, Madam Deputy Speaker, in relation to offshore leasing round 5, which a number of honourable members mentioned in their contributions this afternoon. The Crown Estate has designed the leasing process in such a way that developers have to make commitments to deliver social and environmental value as part of the development of their new wind farms, including a requirement to provide an apprenticeships plan and a skills development plan. The Crown Estate is also committed to working with communities to ensure future generations can make the most of the opportunities marine energy will bring. They're working closely with local education institutions such as Falmouth Marine School, where they help to develop a pre-16 engineering programme to build skilled local workforces, alongside other initiatives including the Marine Internship Programme and recent partnership with the Sea Ranger Service, who are based in Port Talbot. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, in terms of other members' contributions, we heard from the Honourable Member for Ynys, who spoke about the questions in relation to devolution to Wales of the Crown Estate and its functions. And some of the points that she raised were addressed by my honourable friends in their interventions and their contributions. But I think what's important to recognise, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that the proposed powers in this bill will be of huge benefit to Wales. Combined with its existing scale, expertise and track record, the Crown Estate is uniquely placed to help drive the activities required, such as de-risking and developing offshore renewable energy and other emerging offshore technologies to realise the potential of the Celtic Sea. I would be concerned, Madam Deputy Speaker, that further devolution of the Crown Estate in the manner suggested could fragment the renewable energy market and undermine the strong international investor confidence in the UK to the detriment of both Wales and the wider UK. It would risk creating further complexity and delay our drive for energy security and net zero at a time when simplicity and accelerated deployment are essential. And that is why the government believes the existing arrangements are the best way to ensure that the assets of the Crown Estate are managed most effectively to benefit the people across Wales, England and Northern Ireland. Madam Deputy Speaker, to address a few final points which were made today, the Honourable Member for North Antrim spoke about the environmental impacts which were concerning him. And, I would start by saying, of course, offshore wind is essential to meeting both our net zero and energy security objectives, which I hope he would support. But more widely, in terms of getting that balance right, the habitat regulations assessment process ensures that we can deliver our offshore wind requirements whilst maintaining environmental protections. The government is also consulting on revisions to the NPPF to increase support for renewable energy schemes to tackle climate change while safeguarding environmental resources. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, to thank my two honourable friends from Lichfield and York Outer for their particularly impassioned support for the principles behind this bill and what it sets out to achieve. As the honourable member for Lichfield said, this is crucial to the importance of investment, growth, modernising the Crown Estate over the 21st century. And my honourable friend from York Outer focused on the power of the measures within this bill, which are measured reforms to modernise the Crown Estate in supporting growth in a fiscally responsible way whilst generating revenue that will benefit our constituents across the country. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope I've managed to address the points that honourable members have raised during this debate today. As my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, and I have set out, this bill delivers a targeted and measured enhancement to the Crown Estate's powers and governance, thereby modernising it for the 21st century. It broadens the scope of activities the Crown Estate can engage in. It enables the Crown Estate to further invest in the energy transition, and it empowers the Crown Estate to invest in capital-intensive projects more effectively. Critically, these measures will unlock more long-term investment, increasing the contribution of the Crown Estate to generating high-quality jobs and driving growth across the UK. Growth is at the heart of our mission as a government, and I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Programme motion to be moved formally.
Beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Money resolution to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.